Good day, everyone. We are your reporters for today. I am Marish de Mesa.
And I am Tim Ignacio. Our report will consist of the book by Peter Singer entitled Practical Ethics. And our report will be the first chapter of this book, which is about ethics.
This chapter introduces what ethics is all about, but Peter started it by stating what ethics is not.
So, Peter said that first, ethics is not primarily about sex. Next slide. There was a time around 1950s where the newspaper headlines consist some issues such as religious leader attacks declining moral standards, which is about promiscuity, homosexuality, and pornography. These are the most controversial issues back then that is usually associated with morality. That's why this results in the dominance of the narrow sense of morality where it is regarded as a system of nasty puritanical prohibitions, mainly designed to stop people from having fun. Next slide. However, nowadays, religious leaders would tend to talk more about global poverty and climate change rather than promiscuity and pornography. That's why morality or ethics, especially in this time, is not associated anymore with the set of prohibitions concerned with sex. Because morality isn't always about sex. Decisions about sex may involve considerations of honesty, concern for others, prudence, avoidance of harm to others. However, these four decisions could be said of decisions made about driving a car. What's more is that moral issues raised by driving a car is more serious than those raised by safe sex. That's why ethics does not revolve only around the issues of sex. The second one is that ethics is not good in theory, but not in practice. Most people thinks that ethics is just an ideal system that is all very noble and in theory, but no, not good in practice. They say that it is inapplicable to the real world because they assume, especially the deontologists, that ethics is just a system of short and simple rules, such as do not lie, do not steal, and do not kill, which is not suited for the complexity of life. That's why a new perspective or view was raised, which is the view of the consequentialist, which is they start with not in moral rules, but they start with goals. And the best example for this is the utilitarianism, which is also the well-known example of a consequentialist theory. So utilitarianism assess actions by the extent to which they further these goals. It is more focused on producing more happiness for all the people affected. That's why in utilitarianism, an action is being considered as a right action if it produces more happiness for all affected by it than any alternative action. And therefore, an action isn't right or it is wrong if it does not produce more happiness. So there are two qualifications for it being considered as a right action. The first one is it should produce more net happiness. Net happiness is being computed by the happiness gained by the people affected after deducting any suffering or misery caused by the same action. While the second one is if there are two different actions that produce the same amount of happiness, then therefore either of them is right. The consequences of an action vary according to the circumstances in which it is performed. Therefore, a utilitarian may judge as bad in some cases and good in others, which depends on the consequences of the action. That's why ethics is not just good in theory, but it is also good in practice.
So the third thing that ethics is not is that it is not based on religion. Peter Singer treats it entirely independent of religion. The theists, however, argue that ethics would not do without religion because the very meaning of good is none other than what God approves of. Plato refuted this claim by saying that God approves an action because it is good and not the other way around, as the theists claim that an action can only be good if God approves of it. In the alternate view, on the other hand, that if God's approval is arbitrary, then if He approves of torture and disapproves of helping, would that mean that torture is good and helping is bad? The, the theist still maintains their position by saying that God is good and will never approve of torture. Another reason why ethics is associated with religion is that it seems to provide a reason for doing what is right. It promises believers eternity of bliss to those who do right, while those who don't will roast in hell. But not all religious believers approves of this. Immanuel Kant, a pious Christian, condemns this self-interested motive and believes that we must obey the moral law for its own sake. So, if ethics and morality is not based on religion, the question now is, where does it come from? Or where does it originate? Peter claims that our moral faculty developed from the long period of human evolution. This moral faculty generates intuition of what is right or wrong. This is also supported by Franz de Waal's experiment that proved that our primate relatives share a sense of reciprocity just like us humans. So this morality originated from our intuition, then further developed when we acquired language. It's also now further developed as the time became more complicated. In today's time, we cannot rely only on our intuition in deciding what's right or wrong. For example, homosexuality used to be very immoral, but the society is now being more accepting of the LGBTQ community. Some people also claims that ethics is based on nature. But Peter claims that not anything natural is good. As with John Stuart Mill's definition of nature, it is either everything that exists in the universe, including human beings and all that they create, or the world as it would be apart from human beings and what humans bring about. So in the first statement, it means that nothing that humans do is unnatural, while in the second one, everything that humans do is unnatural. So if nature will be the basis of ethics, then it will be a very confusing criteria. So in short, the summary of this section tells us that ethics does not come from God, or it is not a God-given system, nor it does not come from nature. The next thing that ethics is not is that it is not relative to the society in which you live. So the issue here is relativism. So Peter says that relativity may be true in the sense of consequentialism, which Tim discussed a while ago. that actions that are right in one situation because of their good consequences might be wrong in another situation because of their bad consequences. So one action can be relatively right or wrong depending on whether it brings positive or negative consequences. This, however, is a superficial form of consequentialism. The fundamental form arose when the European philosophers became aware of the morality from other places or societies. For example, there are people who approve of sexual relationship between unmarried couples. This made them realize that their moral standards are not at all objective and universally valid. So the fundamental form of relativism says that no moral judgment can do more than reflect the customs of the society in which it is made. The Marxists adopted this form of relativity in their theory. They say that the morality of a society is relative to the morality of the dominant economic class. In doing so, they thought they can prove that morality established by the bourgeoisie is not objective nor universally valid. However, a question arose because of it that if all morality are relative, what's so special about the proletariat morality? Why should we side with it rather than the bourgeoisie? Friedrich Engels, the co-author of Karl Marx, solved this problem by abandoning relativity or relativism. That in a society with class division, its morality will always favor the interest of the ruling class. Instead, he pointed out that the morality of a society without class antagonisms would be a freely human morality. Another criticism to relativism is that it does not account for the nonconformist. For example, if I say that slavery is wrong, according to relativism, it only means that the society I came from disapproves of slavery. While if a slave owner from another society says that slavery is right, then it only means that his society approves of it. But what if someone who came from a society who disapproves slavery still thinks that slavery is right? Relativism doesn't really explain about that. And according to Peter, that beliefs and customs of the society we were brought up with may exercise great influence on us, but we also have the ability to reflect on them and decide whether to act in accordance with them or go against them. For the last thing that ethics is not, it is not a it's not merely a matter of subjective taste or opinion. Subjectivity, unlike relativism, makes ethical judgments depend on the approval or disapproval of the individual rather than the society. But just like in relativism, it also does not account for ethical disagreement. For example, if I say that cruelty to animals is right, while Tim says that cruelty to animals is wrong, if subjectivity is true, then both of us may be correct and there is nothing to argue about it. There are three theories, however, that though they fall under the broad category of subjectivity, are more plausible accounts for ethics. The first one is by C.L. Stevenson, and it's known as emotivism. This theory says that ethical judgments are only our expression of our feeling of right and wrong rather than statements of facts. R.M. Hare's universal prescriptionism states that our ethical judgments are like prescriptions. They are more imperative in nature rather than statement of facts. And lastly, J.L. Mackey's moral skepticism argues that the way we think and talk about ethics implies the existence of objective moral standards, but this, according to him, is an error, and it may be due to our belief that ethics is a God given system or due to our tendency to justify our own preferences as objective. These three theories all agree that there is no objective ethical facts. But they do not deny the role of reason and argument in ethics. And this ethical reasoning will be further discussed by Tim in the next section.
So what ethics is? According to the author, ethics is a one view. Next slide. So a question was presented by Singer, which is who lives by the ethical standards and who are not. The procedure of distinguishing whether one is living by the ethical standards or not runs together into two distinctions. The first one is the distinction between living according to the right ethical standards and living according to mistaken ethical standards. And the second one is the distinction between living according to some ethical standards and living according to no ethical standards at all. Therefore, even though the majority considers that cheating, lying, and stealing is not ethical, but if people who cheat, lie, and steal believes that these actions are ethical or are right, therefore they are living according to their ethical standards. They are not living according to they may be not living according to the conventional ethical standards, but they are still living according to some other ethical standards. Next slide. Therefore, the first attempt, which is to distinguish the ethical from the non-ethical, was mistaken because those who hold unconventional ethical beliefs are still living according to ethical standards because they are believing that they believe that what they are doing is still right, even though in the face of the society or the majority of society, it is not right. So the notion of living according to ethical standards is tied up with the notion of defending the way one is living by giving a reason for it or justifying. An example of this is a situation presented by the author, which is when Macbeth contemplates the murder of Duncan, which looking at the right side of the PowerPoint, there are two statements. So that I can be king in his place, and so that I can end the reign of a cruel tyrant. So of course, when on our own preferences, or maybe on the majority, not all. So the majority of the preferences of the audience, maybe the second one is more of an ethical one compared to the first one, because the first one seems to be an reason or an action based on self-interest. However, on the second one, it is more of a reason based for the greater good of the society. That's why, even though an action is inadequate or it is wrong, but that attempt to justify it brings the person's conduct within the domain of ethical as opposed to the non-ethical. Same on the other hand, which if people who cannot put forward any justification for what they do, even though what they are doing is ethical, it may still be rejected as living according to ethical standards. Next slide. So from ancient times, philosophers and moralists have expressed the idea that ethical conduct is acceptable from a point of view that is somehow universal. So Peter presented some concepts and theories that is similar with ethics, which shows universal point of view. The first one is the golden rule. The second one is the love thy neighbors by ancient Greek philosophers and Stoics in the Roman era. The third one is the famous formula of Kant. The fourth one is the imaginary impartial spectator, proposed by Hutchison, Hume, and Adam Smith. The fifth one is the axiom of utilitarians from Jeremy Bentham to the present, and the imaginary choice behind a veil of ignorance, incorporated by John Rawls. So, like the first one, which is the golden rule, because the golden rule tells us to go beyond our own personal interest, therefore giving the same weight to the interests of others as you give to your own interest is similar to what is ethics is all about. Also, the more detailed, the somehow detailed description for this point of views are presented in the given handout. So you can check it there. So for the next slide. Therefore, the justification of an ethical principle cannot be in terms of any partial or sectional group, because ethical judgment should be universal, or should be looking from a universal point of view. This does not mean that a particular ethical judgment must be universally applicable, but it means that in making ethical judgment, we must go beyond our own likes and dislikes. Therefore, we should be just revolving under one's preferences. Also, according to the author, the author proposed a claim about ethical judgment, which is from a broadly utilitarian position. He says that own needs, wants, and desires cannot count more than the wants, needs, and desires of anyone else. Therefore, they will be referred to as preferences, which should be extended to the preferences of others. In short, our own interest should just be preferences, which should be accounted for the preferences of others. Therefore, we cannot solely just base our actions, or we shouldn't just solely base our actions based on our own interest, because we should extend our own interests or preferences to the people around us. So, next slide. So, a situation was presented by Singer, which shows that ethics goes beyond I and you to the universal law. So, the situation is, example, you are situated in, or you are responsible to gather food for the group. You are one of the members who will gather food for the group. Then you saw a tree with many fruits. Therefore, you have a dilemma whether you will eat all of the fruits by yourself, or you will share it to others. So, based on the pre-ethical stage where you don't know any ethical standards or considerations, you will base your actions, or you will view your decisions on how these actions affect other people's preferences. So, to think ethical, we should know what it's like to be in the position of other, especially the people who will be also affected by the decisions we make. So, we should take on their preferences, imagine how hungry they are, and imagine how much they will enjoy the fruit. By thinking ethically, we are taking account of the preferences of all the people affected by the decisions we will make. Next slide. So, of course, maybe the obvious decision or choice is to share the fruits to all of the people. However, Peter said that sharing the fruits may be the best choice, but however, we must still consider whether the general practice of sharing will benefit or harm those people who were affected by this decision. Because yes, we will give um, food to other people, but it may also be the cost of um, their dependency on you, because it may reduce the amount of food that will be gathered, since some people will have the possibility to cease to gather anything if they will know that they will get sufficient food even though they will not gather their share. And this kind of perspective is a kind of preference utilitarianism, which is weighing all the preferences and adopting a course of action that will maximize the preferences of other people. To do what it is also to do what furthers the preferences of those affected. Therefore, it is going beyond what is expected, or what is the expected outcome or result, which is not similar to the hedonistic utilitarianism defended by classical utilitarians like Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill, and Henry Sidgwick, which focuses only on always do what will maximize the pleasure or happiness and minimize the pain or unhappiness. So, this chapter about ethics presents utilitarianism, specifically preference utilitarianism, being a straightforward ethical theory that requires minimal metaphysical presuppositions that will enable the readers to come up with their own conclusions about issues and arguments regarding ethics. So, in other words, it presents another view that will help us to come up with our own arguments about ethics.
That's all. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.